Stand by. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Live at the Waterhole with Wild Earth in Africa. It is a great delight to chat to you all again today. My name is Ben Coley. I'll be your naturalist for the next couple of hours as we explore all of the wonderful flora and fauna on display at all of our different camera locations across Southern and East Africa. Great delight to hear from you, to answer any questions you might have, to hear even about what you're doing, anything that I can perhaps assist with in terms of those questions that have always made you wonder. I never claim to have all the right answers, but I do love getting your questions as it makes me think and go on to reading and research, because sometimes we don't always think about what we should be reading about. You guys are a great help. So if you do want to get in contact with and with us in general, you can do so by registering on our website. You can on YouTube and ask questions on the chat stream, or of course you can go via X using the hashtag WildEarth. So I would very much love to hear from you. Now I have got Luanda with me in my ear, helping me navigate all these different cameras across the continent. And we're very grateful for your support. But we've started out in Tau Game Lodge, where we're enjoying a yellow-billed stork, doing a little bit of probing for little arthropods in the water there, and some teals in the background having a little swim. And as has been the case for, well, most of the last 3 or 4 days that I've been doing my little stint on Live at the Waterhole, we are being accompanied by some nice herd of elephants, and as expected at Tau, usually some zebras and wildebeests in the background. The last few days definitely being dominated by elephants. As the winter kicks in and the drier weather starts, these elephants more and more regularly coming down to all of our waterhole locations and enjoying the water whilst they can. It's going to become more and more difficult over the coming months to find reliable sources of water. And these man-made water sources are the perfect opportunity to come down, get some well-needed fluid in the system, have a bit of a cool down, a bit of a mud bath, and generally enjoy life. We do see great enjoyment from these herds of elephants. We've had elephants swimming and rolling around in the mud at various locations over the last few days. And we've seen some tiny little babies, which has made my heart, as I'm sure many of you or many of yours, very happy, including one about 3 days ago that I don't think was more than a few weeks old. And we were delighted in her antics for quite a long time. We've had a few greetings come through. Thank you for those. Darcy Miller, hello to you as well. Glad you could join us. Mercedes Bin saying have a happy Tuesday, greeting myself, all the crew in Johannesburg and surrounding areas, and all the rest of you joining us today. Penelope Kenyon from a very hot KwaZulu-Natal north coast, and Joanne Mello, great to hear from you as well. Do keep those notes coming in and say please do ask any questions. Look at this little one having a drink. Are you drinking from the wrong mother, little one? Possibly decided she made a mistake, or maybe following grandmum or aunt. Often difficult to tell with elephants. You have to watch them for a little bit of time, such as the close-knit social structure of these groups, very doting upon young individuals. No, I think we found the right one this time. Hello suckling, which is suckling from a female who is not your mother, does occur in elephants. It's more common in lions, certainly, but it does occur in elephants, although not with alarming regularity. And a lot of the time, it's just sort of a comfort thing, like a comfort blanket. There may not actually be any milk being produced, but it's just very comforting for the youngster, and so such as that close-knit bond, that it's another great way to build relationships within the herds. And you do see sort of animals from the same lineage. So a grandmother might suckle her granddaughter if she's also lactating within those family groups. Remember that an elephant herd is made up entirely, say entirely, there will of course be exceptions, but almost entirely made up of related individuals that all stay together, the females. And then it will be the males that disperse to avoid the problems with inbreeding once they reach sexual maturity. Any time from about between the ages of about 14 and 16 would be the most common time for those bulls to start dispersing. Okay, while we enjoy this lovely scene, let's quickly pop across and see what the weather has in store for us today. Looks like a very pleasant day up in Madrid at the moment, at least 26, 27 degrees. That's not too hot. A lovely winter sunny day. Always a good excuse to come down to the water, have a bit of a drink, throw a bit of dust and mud around. They're getting the best of both worlds, as it were, trying both sides. Still very, very young. Again, not more than probably about 6 months old maximum, I wouldn't have thought. Always difficult to age an elephant, but certainly less than a year, looking at the size, the inquisitive nature. A lot of behaviour mimicry in youngsters, trying to do what the adults are doing. So it looks like he's had a drink already. You can see the dark staining on the trunk, right the way up to the nose, because he probably did go right down and basically drink like other animals, as opposed to sucking the water up into the trunk and then spraying it into the mouth. At that age, these youngsters just don't have the necessary muscular control to be able to maneuver that rather wild appendage and position it nicely in the mouth to squirt water. So it probably went down on the front legs and actually just drank straight from the mouth. Yeah, very young. Still see the pink on the backs of the ears there, where they flopped forward. It's a very good sign of youth in young elephants. Look at that pink colour. Yeah, only a few months old. If you can't use your trunk to fling dust on yourself like that young male on the right, then why not just have a roll around in it? That seems to be fine for the zebras and the wildebeest, works for other animals. This young elephant making a plan. Nice to see an ostrich wandering past in the background as well. Incredibly strong legs and those big two claws, which are very, very sharp. Do not underestimate an ostrich. Could cause you a lot of damage. And this is a male ostrich, which we can tell by the colour. So there is a definite dimorphism between the two sexes in ostriches. Males very much blackish in colour, females far more brown. Now this one doesn't look as if he's in any sort of reproductive state. You can normally tell an ostrich's reproductive intentions from the males by the presence of a very, very red beak, and the legs go very, very red as well. It's just an advertisement for the females and for any other males that he is feeling particularly amorous at the moment. And I don't see any of those telltale sort of pink colours coming through, so very much this one is just enjoying a trip to the local waterhole. So we can see a teenage bull in the foreground here, definitely a boy from what we can see, but still young enough to be staying with the herd. I would say estimate a young teenager here, maybe sort of around the age of 10 to 12, somewhere there. And that slow process of dissociation from the breeding herd will start over the next few years. You normally find the younger males loitering at the back of the herd, not wanting to be too close to all the action, stay away from the adults, and then over a period of years, they will, potentially months, more likely years, they will start spending or exploring further and further afield, spending longer and longer time away from the herd until they do become independent from the rest of their family, and they will likely join up with another group of males, form little bachelor groups, whilst they wait for the opportunity to get involved in the breeding program themselves, but they've got a long time to wait for that. It takes quite a few years, not necessarily to come into um, sexual capability, but more in having the opportunity. And elephants are forever growing, and you have to wait till you're big enough to compete. Mercedes Bean, you're also commenting on the cute, tiny little one. We have been very, very fortunate over the last few days to see so many youngsters out in the open like this, being able to watch their antics. Trying to see if this is a little boy or a little girl, but well, we're not going to see anything now. Difficult to tell, of course, from this range. We need to have a look underneath the stomach and see if we can see any telltale signs. My initial thought was that it was a young boy, just for the way some of the body language looked like had a little bit more bravado than perhaps one might expect at a young age, which is normal for young elephant boys. And some lovely scenes in the background of some zebra and wildebeest, which we often do see in this area. Canopy Kenyon, you're also mentioning that they are great bushmates, often seen associating with one another. Not much competition between zebras and wildebeest, particularly with what they eat. They are well known to eat different parts of the same grasses, so they can actually work together to completely utilize an area. So they're not in direct competition in terms of their feeding strategies. Of course, they have different digestive systems. Zebra more like a horse, what we call a hind gut fermenter, same as an elephant really, so far less efficient stomach. Quite happy to survive on more fibrous vegetation, less nutritious vegetation, and just eat more of it. Whereas the wildebeest are closer to a cow or a sheep, they are ruminants with four-chambered stomachs and require a lot less food because they can process it more efficiently, but they do require food of higher quality. So the zebras will often eat the top parts of the grass, which is more fibrous. They quite like the inflorescence, which is the sort of pretty flowery reproductive parts of the grass that trims them down and leaves the more succulent shoots closer to the floor available to the wildebeest, who can then benefit from that. Beautiful grey heron coming into land. Eric, today you're asking whether lionesses hunt more than lions. I assume you're referring to male lions. As a generalized rule, Eric, they do when part of a pride structure. Excuse me. But it's a bit of a fallacy that male lions don't do any of the hunting. Of course, those zebra and wildebeest are very much high up on the preference menu of lions if they can catch them. But in an established pride structure with a dominant male in tow, then you normally find that the females do a lot of the hunting themselves, and then the male will watch from a distance, may well get involved depending on the type of prey, but he purposely doesn't want to get too involved, because if the lionesses are stalking a herd of zebra or a herd of wildebeest, he may be bigger and a little bit more beautiful in terms of his mane, but that makes it harder for him to hide. And there's a far better chance that those lions' cover will be blown by the male, because he's more difficult to keep hidden. So he will often just benefit from the spoils of war, and he will often be the first to feed at a carcass until he has, particularly if it's something small, he might steal the whole thing, which can be seen as rather rude behaviour by some. But I suppose the best way to see it is that it is his fee for protecting the area. It's his rent money to look after that group of females to ensure that their cubs and his genetic investment is safe. He needs lots of energy to patrol his territory and fight off any rogue males. Excuse me again, suffering from a little bit of the snivels over the last couple of days. Because if any of those males were to overthrow him and then take over that area, the first thing that they would do would be to kill any cubs that are not their own, or if they're a little bit too old, they would get run out and likely not make it because they haven't yet developed the skill set to hunt for themselves. So it may be seen as a little bit harsh, but it's very important that he stays on the top of his game for the protection of all the members of the pride. That being said, they do go off on territorial patrols on their own for long periods of time, and of course, in that couple of years when they leave their mothers to when they're big enough and strong enough to potentially establish their own territory, then they have to hunt for themselves over those 2 years. And male lions are more than capable of hunting for themselves if they need to. And don't forget, of course, there are males who are never able to hold a pride. If it's a relatively small area with a surplus of males, there's only as much territory to go around, and some males may never hold a territory at all and will have to look after themselves, hunt for themselves, scavenge a lot of food from other lions, from hyenas, from animals that have succumbed to natural deaths. Mindy Tilpau, you're asking me if I think it's confusing for the little ones to be pushed out of a herd when it's the only family they've ever known. Um, that's a rather a sad thought, I suppose, and very difficult to answer. We will never fully know what goes on in the minds of these animals. I'm sure it is a little bit confusing to begin with, but I also do believe that nature has been doing it for so long that it becomes well, it's a genetic desire to do so. Um, it's something sort of ingrained within the behavior. Obviously, I can't speak for all humans, but most of us, by the time we get to sort of 16, 18, are looking forward to going to university or college or varsity, whatever you call it in your particular area, having your independence and going off to explore on your own. So there is, I think, again, a lot of sort of genetic predisposition to do it, although I would imagine to begin with it probably is a little bit confusing. And don't forget, it's only the young males that will be ousted. Females will stay within their herd for the entirety of their lives, unless the herd splits for some reason. Maybe there's not enough resources in a particular area, and you may find that a group splinters off to live out life in a different area, but they're always welcome back. Lots of lovely greeting rituals between related herds. Mercedes Ben, you think the little one is a little girl? I've forgotten to look now, but it's quite possible. I haven't had a close enough look. But what we consider that, let's head up to Kenya to Oldonyo Lodge. Speaking of zebra, there's a nice dazzle of zebra having a drink. despite being up in East Africa now, these are still plains zebra, so the same species of zebra that we were seeing down in Madikwe in the northwestern side of South Africa. But there is a regional difference. You can see that these ones do not possess that shadow stripe, which we see in the southern African races, which is that sort of brownish line between the blacks and the whites, or going through the middle of the white lines. No permanent explanation as to why that be the case, although the most logical thing is to do with the difference in habitat. Generally speaking, much more open grasslands up in East Africa, a lot more wooded in the southern part of the continent, whereby having those extra browns may assist in terms of camouflage. You tend to get most predators see in black and white, and whilst to you and I this may not look like very effective camouflage at all, they're very, very obvious. If you could take a picture of a zebra in the long grass and then turn it into black and white, which is how a lion would see it, you'll be surprised how effective potentially those stripe patterns can be to help them blend into the environment. Of course, it's not predominantly used as camouflage. It does seem to have an effect of confusing, like pregnant zebra on the right there, of confusing a predator. Once all those stripes start moving in different directions, it becomes very, very difficult for a predator to discern direction and trajectory in terms of planning a hunt. Lots of other potential mechanisms for the stripes, which we've discussed, the most recent being their ability to dissuade biting flies from landing on them. Where did everybody go? A quick visit from the zebras there. We had some lovely views yesterday of a nice giraffe bull having a drink. In fact, we've seen quite a few giraffe bulls drinking up at this waterhole over the last month or two. Always fun to watch. Yeah, it seems we're going to do a whirlwind tour of our cameras now that the zebras have left us. So we've gone from the northwest of South Africa up into East Africa now. We're going to go right down to the Eastern Cape, the Founders Lodge. See who's visiting the waterhole there. It's a spa day for a walk. Fantastic. Our rhinos, as we saw yesterday, whether it's the same ones. Still some rhinos enjoying the shade of that little acacia tree. Very, very special sightings we had yesterday of these rhinos coming down and enjoying drinks from this pan. Of course, those of you unaware, Founders Lodge is one of the only cameras where we are allowed to show you rhinos, of course, because of the poaching problems. And quite the honour to be able to bring those images to you. Today you're asking what about cheetahs? What animals do they hunt? Well, the zebra and the wildebeest that we were discussing earlier, that's a little bit too big for a cheetah, although a young calf is certainly fair game. But very few cheetahs would have the fortitude and the bravery to go in there amongst a herd. You wouldn't want to risk getting kicked or gored by one of those horns or a zebra hoof. But if one was abandoned or had lost track of the rest of the herd, that one would be fair game. But their general food supply will be the smaller antelope species. So in southern Africa, it will be things like impalas, duiker, springbok, steenbok, depending on what antelopes are in that area. They do not really scavenge. Cheetahs are quite picky with their foods. They don't like old carcasses, old fetid meat, because they also don't want to run the risk of bumping into any hyenas. But it's quite normal for a cheetah to make a kill and then not get to eat all of it because it was easily chased off. It knows it doesn't have the strength to put up any sort of fight against another predator, and in fact even the presence of a few jackals harassing it or even just a few vultures can be enough to dissuade a cheetah. So not really so much from risk of injury, but just because of the commotion that's being created, there's a very good chance that other predators will be attracted to that area. In areas like East Africa, of course, there are different antelope species up there. There are a lot of gazelles and other similarly sized antelope that will make up the bulk of a cheetah's diet. Annual P. How dangerous is it for animals trying to hunt a calf when the whole herd turns and faces them instead of running? It's very dangerous. Manuel P. Very dangerous indeed. And most predators will call it a day at that point. They sort of rely upon the chaos that they create when they run into a herd. They try and scatter them. They try and isolate an individual. But if the whole herd comes back, then they could be in a lot of difficulty, even if it's not a particularly large animal, just sheer strength of numbers. Remember that most antelope do have ways to defend themselves. They have horns, they have hooves. A swift kick from a zebra is enough to shatter a lion's skull. Giraffes obviously wouldn't come back as herds, but a giraffe can easily kill a lion if required. The most famous example of that sort of behaviour, which we would call mobbing behaviour, is documented in buffaloes. That happens very regularly. That if lions do take out a buffalo calf or a member of a herd, that animal will let out distress calls. And after the initial sort of panic and chaos has subsided, it is very much normal for that herd, particularly the males within the group, to join forces, form a wall, and just approach the predators and have a very good chance of chasing them away. The most famous example of all is that very well-known YouTube video, which back in the day was the most viewed video on YouTube, the Battle of Kruger, as it was known, when lions took out a young buffalo and then it sort of fell half in, half out of the water. Then a crocodile grabbed it. The crocodile and the lions were having a bit of a tug of war, by which point the buffaloes had regrouped, came back, chased the lions away, and rescued the young one, who, as far as I know, went on to be fine. Amazing amateur footage from within the Kruger National Park. Nice to see our rhinos up and about. So this is not the same group of three that we saw yesterday. I see we've got a female with a youngster at the back. I'm guessing this is a male. This is one of the ones we saw yesterday. It's a treat to see the next generation. Yeah, little Tucker sitting on the secondary horn there, having a good look around. Perfect perch. Wonderful, wonderful animals. It seems we've hopped up to Victoria Falls. We're trying to get as many countries in as possible today by the look of it. The marabou stork. Marabou stork and a hooded vulture. It seems we may have been having some problems with the feed there at Founders Lodge, so sorry if you had any issues your side. A bit of a little and large. Two of our great scavengers and another yellow-billed stork in the background. Sizing each other up. Stork taking the opportunities to do a little bit of feather maintenance, very important to do so when you're such a big, heavy bird, a wingspan of a good, I would think, 2.5 meters there or thereabouts. And these storks are not lightweight. They can weigh in excess of 5 kilograms, and that's a lot of energy to have to carry around with you in flight. So very important that your flight feathers are in good condition. You see birds doing this a lot. It's just zipping up those feathers, particularly along the wings, to make sure that they're all connected nicely to one another, make for a good solid trailing edge to create the maximum amount of lift. A beautiful sight when you see these great big columns of large raptors above your head. Often misconstrued as a sign that something must be dead. But really, I think the best way to be sure is to watch them. If they're all landing in a particular position, then it's definitely worth checking something out. But say, particularly early in the morning or later in the morning in the winter, after the slightly subdued power of the sun has warmed up the earth, and you get those great columns of warm air rising that are sort of focused in particular areas due to the type of rock, perhaps, that it's radiating from. And that's a fantastic way to gain height without having to flap your wings and carry that great bulk as you're flying. So they will just circle higher and higher and higher and higher. You can see these thermals, almost sort of visualize them there with the way that they're rotating around those birds, a little bit like sort of a tornado. And that will allow them to gain height, and then they will glide to another thermal, gain height again after they've lost a little bit of altitude, and they can travel for huge distances without a single flap of their wings. Flight is all about efficiency and weight saving. Those relatively hollow bones in comparison to ours, certainly. Birds don't have teeth. Dentine and enamel is very, very heavy. That's one of the reasons they've developed beaks. That swirling column of raptors. You can see this vulture's got his landing gear down. And that's really what you want to look for if you see lots and lots of birds and lots of vultures. Are they going up or are they going down? You will also get big congregations of vultures around water, particularly after they've been feeding. They have a horrific reputation, thanks to documentaries and sort of cartoon movies and things that we're all very much well aware of. They have a horrible reputation of being sort of filthy, unclean animals, but they're actually very clean animals, vultures. They bathe regularly. I've seen groups of hundreds of vultures gathered around waterholes, all having a good splash around, cleaning off some of those bodily fluids that they've picked up from completely disappearing in some cases into carcasses. Characteristic vulturine noise that you can hear in the background. Not a pretty sound by any stretch. Very much associated with vultures. You always hear that around a carcass site as they squabble with each other. And then it's a very good cue that travels across the veldt that other scavengers and predators will key off and hone in on that sound in the hope of getting a potential meal. Oh, JT, that's a difficult question. If I could bring any animal back from extinction, which one would it be? I have to think about that for a while. The child in me is instantly going to a whole variety of dinosaurs, um, but I think possibly something a little bit more recent than that. I suppose it would be nice if we could bring back all the animals that have become extinct due to human activity. That would be a nice way of looking at it, of which there are far more than we realise, of course. We tend to only think of the big and the scaries, but we're losing insects and arachnids and those smaller organisms at an alarming rate as well. Um, the megalodon, that wouldn't be a bad one. Saber-toothed tigers, maybe even those. How about those giant dragonflies that used to be around before dinosaurs that had wingspans of meters across, and scorpions that measured 2 or 3, maybe even 4 meters in length? The world would be an interesting place if those were still wandering around. What about you, Josie? What would you bring back? Or anybody else for that matter? My mind also went to the woolly mammoth. But I think probably because that was topical, because we had a discussion about that last month, about the way that the global warming is melting a lot of the permafrost, and lots of mammoth skeletons, and even also in some cases bodies are being unearthed because they were frozen and never really got a chance uh, to decompose, and the problems that that has brought in terms of mammoth tusks and elephant tusks and the ivory trade. They are both different, well, both ivory, but in different. You can tell the difference between the two of them, and there is no illegal trade on mammoth tusks at the moment, but it is causing some problems within the industry. American stork having a good snap at what looks like a whiteback vulture there. Penelope Kenyon, that's a good one. You'd like to see the dodo brought back. Yep, I have no problems with that whatsoever. Good shout. Or the moa as well would be another good one, having spent some time in New Zealand recently. Always look out for that black stalk when we're up here at Vic Falls. Nice to see both the marabous and the yellowbills, but occasionally we do see a little black stork, and his fishing antics are always highly entertaining, the way they wrap their wings around their body and make a sort of a cloak to block out the glare from the sun. I've seen a couple of those up here over the last few months. Mercedes being you saying you were a big fan of dinosaurs back in the day, but you don't think you'd want to bring them back now. Well, I'm sure most of you have seen Jurassic Park, and it didn't work out very well then. So, yes, I agree. It's probably best not to, but it would be quite amazing to see some of those creatures. The fact that they were just, I think the sheer size. I mean, I'm still blown away by the size of elephants. I was chatting to somebody the other day about what it's like to encounter an elephant up close and personal on a walk, where you just really don't fully appreciate the size of that animal, because often when we do view them, we're in cars or in game viewers, and we're already a meter and a half above the ground, and yet we still marvel at their size. But to be standing in front of an elephant is one of the most insignificant experiences that you could have in terms of your own insignificance. Standing next to such an enormous beast, I always use the example: you should pretty much hold a broom handle by one end, hold it above your head, and still not even be able to touch an elephant's chin that is standing above you with its head up, trying to look intimidating. It's like a two-story house stood in front of you. Imagine if you had a T-Rex or a brachiosaur that you were dealing with. It would be quite the experience, I'm sure. You're also suggesting you'd want something small that wouldn't eat you. Well, I think that's good survival instincts clicking in, Mercedes B. I'd be inclined to agree with you. We're going to build stalk. Got something down there. Looks like this one is just probing the mud. You see the way he's disturbing things with his feet there, just trying to encourage anything to move, and then they fill with those receptors on his beak and snap them up when they do so. Other times you see them just sort of filtering their open beak left and right through the water, just waiting for anything to touch one of the surfaces of those mandibles, and then snap shut like a mouse trap and trap what anything was foolish enough to swim in between it. Looks like we've got a new vulture coming down for a drink at the front there. Is that a white-headed vulture? Doesn't look quite big enough to be a lappet face, but you can see the size of the beak in comparison to the others. nice to see some large bird diversity. But let's head over to Jamala back in Madikwe and see what's going on down there. All sorts of things. Elephants, giraffes drinking, zebras drinking, more elephants coming. The Jamala waterhole has been pumping over the last few days. It's been really special to be able to watch some of the stuff going on here. We've got a nice musty bull approaching. Things giving him a little bit of space. See the temporal gland secretions again, and those dark stains on the inside of the back legs as his penis constantly dripping urine in that reproductive state. Big elephant bulls like that can stay in must for as much as half the year sometimes. Generally speaking, the older the elephant, the longer the must cycle. Little interactions between these young males here. You see the little trunk touch to the mouth. See what happens as this big boy approaches these two youngsters. I wonder if that's where the pipe is. That's where they were also drinking from something, and you can see this bull has pushed his way in. Looks like there's a little bit of a sort of an enclave there. Some fresh water and some lovely moments. So even a big musting bull, these youngsters just greeting him. Yeah, I'd rather pick on someone your own size. was doing a little bit more reading after our discussions about cancer in elephants yesterday. Um, didn't find out anything sort of that we didn't briefly discuss, but it all comes down to their lack of, or the seeming lack of cancer. It does occur, but only in about sort of 3 to 5% of individuals. Comes down to that special gene known as P53 that we also have, but we only have one copy of it, which we get made up of two proteins, one from each of our parents, whereas elephants have 20 copies of it. And that gene's role is to seek out any new cells that are being created or being replicated that aren't, let's say, pure, and either remove them or fix them. But generally speaking, they will just be destroyed. And it's one of the sort of the paradoxes in life. Normally, cancer affects those animals that are more long-lived because there's multiple mutations and more cells in those bodies that are getting replaced, and the likelihood is that more and more of them would be damaged, and that can lead to the onset of cancer in various areas. It seems elephants are very well equipped to deal with that, with this surplus of the P53 gene. And we see it in other big animals as well, not necessarily P53, but whales, some of the longest lived animals on the world. The bowhead whale can live up to 200 years. Very, very minimal examples of cancer in there as well. So it seems to be they have a slightly different mechanism of dealing with it, but it's that ability to destroy any mutated cells that, left unchecked, could go on to cause problems in later life. And also they have a very slow mutation rate of those cells in their body compared to other animals. It seems to be this sort of form of, if you want to call it gigantism, nature has found a way to combat that threat of damaged cells. I didn't realize how prevalent cancer was in other animals as well. Obviously, we know about a lot of the domesticated animals. We don't see it an awful lot in wild animals because it generally affects the older animals. And in the wild, a lot of animals don't get to live to be very, very old because it's a fairly harsh life and there's a lot of risk of predation and environmental factors. But it does happen. There's even cancer that affects mollusks and oysters and clams. There's been a nasty one which has had a massive impact on the Tasmanian devil population over the last 30 or 40 years. That actually seems to be a transmissible form of cancer that can be transmitted by biting another one. It's some sort of facial cancer, which sounds pretty horrible. Something else that's strangely almost immune to it are naked mole rats. Not something you might have thought about. They can live up to about 30 years, and very, very few cases ever reported in there due to the presence of some substance that sort of sits in between the different cells, but does the same job of policing any problem cells that seem to develop. And all of a sudden, there were many elephants. Afternoon to you, Dark Main Lover, as well. Thanks for joining us. So it was your arrival which has also spawned these great mass of elephants that have joined us at Jamala. We might have the makings of another pool party on the far bank. The youngsters enjoy a good roll around. The little one, not quite so sure. We'll settle for struggling to get up the bank for now. Liverpool bird, you're asking, are there any crocs at Jamala? Not to my knowledge. Otherwise, I don't think we would see the animals quite as forthcoming with their wading around in the water. There are not very many crocodiles in Madikwe because of the lack of any large water sources and perennial rivers. There are no hippos really in Madikwe either. There are some on the far eastern edge because there's a river that runs along the eastern boundary that does have hippos in, but I don't believe there are any hippos within the reserve itself. And if there are any, well, we know there's at least one at Tau, but very, very few crocodiles in Madikwe for the animals to have to worry about. JT, I'm aware of the Tasmanian tiger. I've seen pictures of them, but I don't know anything about them at all, except that they were have been extinct for a while. But yeah, I've seen photographs of them, quite sort of sleek, slim-looking predators. But yeah, that would be a nice to have seen one of those or to bring those back, certainly. Tasmanian devil I would very much like to see. And I've got to think about wolverines at the moment as well. I had an opportunity a little while ago, which I was never able to, unfortunately, take to go to an area of Wyoming over in the States where very occasionally wolverines are sighted. I'm not really quite sure why, but that's sort of very high on my list of animals I'd like to see. That and a giant anteater. I think about giant anteaters as well. I don't know if any of you saw the mammals series recently, the latest BBC and David Attenborough production. There were some incredible scenes of Tasmanian devils, and very proud to say I know one of the directors who were on that shoot. And I know they got some incredible footage, including some young activity from some young wolverines as well. A bit of a sprint from that youngster on the far side just now. He's really, really excited to get down to the water. Everyone else seems to be having such a good time. Look at these two in the middle as well. A little bit of rough and tumble. Slap bang in the centre of the water hole. And your mum just coming to police the little one there to make sure he's okay on the far side. A little bit of extra exuberance from the young ones. Don't want that youngster slipping in and having an accident. Amazing to watch the little interactions between all the individuals. The ones that are playing, other ones that are just giving each other a little nudge and a shove, the little sudden body language which cause elephants to move away from each other. There's an awful lot of respect, dominance and hierarchy. A young male at the bottom here is quite keen to get in and have a drink around the pipe. He's just waiting his turn. Pushed out bigger females there. And nice to see one of the bigger ones in the water. Not often you see the large ones lying down, which is far more difficult to get up for them. But for those youngsters, a little bit more exuberance. They do enjoy a good roll around in the water there. Always nice to see. We saw some mounting behaviour, just a lot of play, a lot of bit of sort of mock dominance going on. Also important to learn these social cues. With far left, they're also coming in for a swim. That one had a full-on trip. That was definitely not planned. I was trying to make as if it was obviously intended now. Elephant number 52, what made me decide to become a naturalist? I don't know really, it's just something that I always wanted to do. I always wanted to work with animals, but as many of you may know, I was born and grew up in the UK, and there isn't a great deal of opportunity over here, and there's a huge surplus of people who want to work with animals. I used to sort of work at local stables. I grew up absolutely surrounded by pets, was fortunate to grow up in the countryside. So I've always had an exposure to animals and always enjoyed watching their behaviours and just delighting in the innocence of their lives, I suppose. I did try at one point to join the RSPCA over in the UK as an inspector, which is a very very sort of sought after and popular position. I believe, if I remember rightly, I'm going back 20 years or so. I think there were about three applicants, and I'm proud to say I got down to the last 50. And then they kept 20 and cut 30, and I was in the 30 that was cut. And when I did ask why, fine, I accept it, but what can I do to be more successful? And the answer was, well, you need more experience. And I was sort of stuck in that dilemma that many of us have been in, that, or to get experience, I need a job, and to get a job, I need experience. And it was such a long process. It involved 3 or 4 interviews and team building days and things to get that far. It took over a year. And then to have nothing to show for it except to go and get more experience. That's when it was the straw that broke the I can never say that word, straw that broke the camel's back. And I had a bit of money saved up, and I signed up to go and do a guide training course over in South Africa, and never looked back. Enjoyed it as much as I thought I would do. Discovered even more of a passion for wildlife and learning and trying to understand the intricacies of it. And the more I learnt, the more excited it made me. Really sharing information with others, and from a sort of teaching perspective. And it's just not the mundane grind as well. I think that's what really draws me to it. We often say it, but it's that not knowing what you're going to see around the next corner. You're not sitting in a featureless office staring at a brick wall, filing papers and entering columns of numbers onto a computer. You're out, you're looking for things, you're experiencing incredible sights, sounds, smells, sensory overload. And I just find it such a rewarding experience in all aspects. Look at this group of elephants in the middle. There's tens of them in there now, having an absolute blast. Spectacular. There's a writhing mass, pod of elephants, potentially. But I think we're going to pop over to Naledi, and see what's happening at the dam there. We've got a slightly more sedate gathering of elephants up in Olifants West, an area that I know quite well. My first job, my placement period after I finished my qualifications, was spent in Olifants West. I spent a hugely enjoyable 6 months exploring Olifants West with a succession of guests. My first proper feel for the work as a guide or as a naturalist in the real world. Not too far from Naledi, actually. We used to traverse on Naledi's property back in those days, I think, or it was very close to us, whether we actually went on it. Changed a lot since those days, though, I would imagine. I remember being very, very fearful of elephants back in those days as well, or very, very respectful, perhaps is a better word. The first time I ever encountered elephants while I was in the driver's seat during my training, I shall never forget it. I'd never had the responsibility of being the one in charge of the accelerator and the steering wheel should something go wrong. And we ended up with being utterly surrounded by a group of 40 elephants. And I'm not going to lie, I was shaking like a leaf, as white as a sheet. I had my hand on the keys, I could hear the keys jangling, I had my foot in on the clutch in case I needed to start and move, and I couldn't control my legs shaking. It was a mixture of, I think it was just a whelmed feeling mixed with the sudden realization of the responsibility to be the responsible person and deal with a problem that may or may not arise. And it took a little bit of time to sort of accept that as part of the job. I remember the first game drive I ever went on, I spoke to my tracker and just sort of said to him, let's not get too close to any elephants just while I get my confidence up. And of course, what was the first thing that we saw about 2 minutes out of the lodge, right on the side of the road, was a great big elephant bull. But it's probably the best thing you can do at sink or swim time. We had a lovely sighting of him. He was nice and close. There was no um, aggressive behaviour, and I think it's moments like that that just enable you to settle into what is expected and build the confidence that you need. Ironic, really, now because when I go out these days, I hope to find elephants and hope to spend time with them full circle from worrying about them and almost thinking about avoiding them in the first few months of my career. Now I've still, and I know many other guides and naturalists will tell you the same. There's nothing quite like spending some time with elephants, feeling their energies, watching their interactions. A very special experience. That was very wasteful. Just thinking there's a lot less water in here than there was yesterday. Let's not spray it all over the ground, young boy. Oof, that's one of my favourite sighting that I've ever had. There are so many to choose from. I honestly don't know if I could ever pick an absolute favourite. There are ones that spring to mind. Being sat in a herd of about 100 elephants in the dark during the night under full moon and just watching all the silhouettes and those elephants subtly lit by the moonlight as they're sort of drifting around in and amongst the vehicles that we were in. That was very, very special and sort of almost a spiritual moment that I remember. One that I know I've mentioned before in the Sabi Sands, where it's a sort of a long story, but having seen absolutely nothing for about 2 hours, and I mean absolutely nothing, not even an impala, and hardly even a bird, yeah, I ended up in a sighting that had mating leopards, a pride of lions, and a pack of wild dogs all chasing each other around. Two leopards up trees. Um, the leopards were treed by dogs that came in. Lions came in and chased the dogs away, and that was another one of those sort of stark reminders that anything can happen at any time. Um, what else? Again, the heart. Obviously seen some heartbreaking things of animals killing other animals. That's been pretty brutal. I remember the first time I ever watched a kill happened in front of me. The lions took out a warthog. I was obviously as excited as everybody else to see it happen, but had not really prepared myself for the noise that a warthog makes as it is torn apart by a pride of lions. That was traumatic and will live with me for a long time. There are so many to choose from. The longer I think about it, the more I will remember. Leopard cubs approaching my vehicle, going under my Land Rover and coming out on the other side of the Land Rover as if we didn't exist. That was pretty amazing. A female leopard who'd killed a daker and then opened it up and pulled out a daker fetus from inside it, which shocked us all. Another sort of stark reminder of the harshness of life. I mean, I've seen some incredible things of which I'm hugely thankful for, but it's impossible to just choose one. I really can't. But thank you for making me think about them. They've all sort of shot through my brain, flashing before your eyes sort of moment as I've tried to remember them in all the different places that I've been. Jungle Gym, no, those thorns are not really a massive issue for elephants when they're feeding. Their skin is so thick that it really makes no difference to them whatsoever. They might rip an ear every now and again on a really big sicklebush spine, perhaps, um, but they really don't have to worry about it. They've got armor-plated skin, which can deal with all of that. They've got very, very long eyelashes to protect the eyes, and any thorns that they do get in their mouth and they ingest are ground up by those teeth. And to be honest, just come out the other side completely undigested. Sometimes elephants' digestive system, as we know, is very poor. It's not very efficient. It's why they have to eat such large volumes of food. And it is one of those things that you learn very quickly. You don't drive over elephant dung, not just because of the ecological consequences of essentially dung beetles and the little ecosystems that are contained within those piles of dung, but also that some of those big thorns and spines might have come straight through the animal and can still puncture your tyre. This one, however, does seem to be having difficulty manoeuvring himself. Not sure if he's having a scratch or if he's just. I think he's just struggling to get his foot placement right. And look a little ungainly at times. I'm still going back to your question, Elephant Love. All these memories are still flooding through my head. Some of the smaller things that don't instantly sort of pop into your mind. Watching a solifuge and having a thick-tailed bush baby just appear out of the darkness and grab it and take it off up into the trees. The first time I saw ants tending to aphids and was watching them sort of with my binoculars turned around and using them like a microscope and seeing these little aphids producing those little droplets of honeydew and the ants feeding on them. It's every part of first time that I saw a tortoise beetle. I remember that because I was very excited because I'd never seen one before. Watching a Mozambique spitting cobra taking out a bird, another one with a spitting cobra having an altercation with a chameleon, or a chameleon was being swallowed but just had its tail wrapped around a branch and was refusing to be swallowed. There are so many, all of them different but equally amazing. So the elephant there is a little bit old to be suckling. So it looks like a good 4 or 5 years old, that elephant. Whether or not he's actually getting any milk there, I'm not sure. Whether it's that comfort thing we were discussing earlier, or whether there's another young calf somewhere that female has a new one and this one's taking a chance. Or possibly if she's heavily pregnant, she may be beginning to lactate already. This one's taking advantage of, but certainly not requiring milk at this age. Elliot, you're asking why elephants have evolved to be immune to bee stings. Um, I don't know. It's probably not really a massive issue for them. If they do get stung, it'll be a bit annoying, but it's not going to cause them any great damage, perhaps in a big swarm factor. But a bee sting is not going to get through that tough skin unless it happens to get stung in one of the more sort of sensitive, thinner areas of skin, like around the ears, perhaps, or the edge of the trunk. So I don't know why they haven't evolved it. I guess it wasn't deemed a genetic requirement to evolve an immunization against a bee sting. Elephants don't like bees. Certainly, they are wary of them. So I guess it has happened to quite a few of them in the past. It's one of the ways in which we try and sort of keep elephants away from certain areas is by putting hives there. And one of the reasons it is thought elephants don't like drones is because it sounds like a great big swarm of bees. Because that swarm of bees can be very nasty, even for an elephant. I've been caught up in one of those before, but ended up with multiple stings. Thankfully, no anaphylactic reactions. But I got stung 7, 8, 9 times for no apparent reason whatsoever. And it's horrible. You don't know what to do or where to go. I doubt quite why they haven't developed an immunity to it. I can only imagine it was just deemed not necessary from an evolutionary standpoint. Niall, you're asking how authorities get rid of elephant tusks that they confiscate from poachers. In some cases, they are burnt, but generally speaking, they're stockpiled. There are warehouses full of stockpiled tusks and things. And quite what is ever going to happen to them, I don't know. It seems, we don't want to. There's all these ideas of flooding the market, which I personally don't agree with particularly, but leaving them in these places is almost a bit of temptation. Say in some cases they are burnt, but in the majority of cases they are just stockpiled to be used somewhere in the future. I don't know. I'm sure people have got a plan, but for now, just a lot of storage. It is a shame that we have to go to those measures, though, but I would assume destroying them is probably the easiest thing because I do worry that having great big stockpiles of tusks and horn and things like that, let's say it does lead to temptation for someone to try and take it back at some point. I know a lot of countries say have got rid of those stockpiles, those surplus amounts by burning and crushing, but there are still lots and lots available or being stored. Always amazes me to see that nobody bothers to go to the water on the left. It's odd that we see them so much in places like Jamala and Tau and Madukwe. Don't often see it happening in places like this, more in the Lowveld, and I don't see it very rarely. Whether or not it is the typical dance, as we were discussing earlier, certainly a possibility, particularly for the younger animals. Clustered around that little well there, hanging out at the bar. Oh, we've got a lovely big lone bull up at Old Domio now. Monopolising the entire waterhole. looks like he's a left-tusked elephant, this one. Of course, just like most of us are either right or left-handed, with the occasional exception of very lucky ambidextrous people. Elephants will almost always favour one tusk over the other, and you can normally see that in the wear and tear of the tusk. This one's got quite thin tusks, I might add, for an adult, although he's not particularly old elephant yet, and very symmetrical tusks, which is nice to see. It looks like there's a little bit of damage to the one on the left, so that's likely the one that he will always use for digging, for stripping bark off trees, looking for that nutritious cambium layer where the sugars from photosynthesis are kept, that sort of brownish layer in between the heartwood and the bark that we see on the outside. If you ever do see a recently stripped tree like that, if you get there quickly, you can even take some of that cambium and in some cases chew it and you'll taste that the water is sweet, showing why the elephants are eating a lot of it, particularly during the drier months. They also have a preferred side of their trunk. So just like you and I are right-handed or left-handed, the elephant is taking grass, plucking grass from the ground. It will almost always wrap its trunk around the grass in the same direction, and will often end up being stained on one side of the trunk, that sort of greenish colour from all of the juices from the grass. I know there have been a lot of people watching. There's one time the big elephant bull who's sometimes seen up here at Orgonio. He's had a little bit of an issue with his right tusk of late. There's been some bleeding there. I have had a look at some of the footage of it, and we've debated what may have happened to it, whether it was an abscess which has sort of burst, but there seems to be quite a lot of blood seeping down from the top of or by the roots there onto the tusk itself, which is quite unusual. So it could be an abscess, or it could have been some sort of displacement of the tusk in the roots, perhaps caused by trying to lever something or a fight with another elephant bull, which has caused some damage to the roots of that tusk. I don't know if he's been seen over the last 3 or 4 days, but of course we wish him all the best, and I'm sure he will recover quickly. Animals do have an incredible way of recovering very, very fast from injuries. A lot of people think, oh, should we be involved and should we be helping? But more often than not, nature will find a way to fix that problem. Far more resilient than we often think. Sniff of everything around there, very deliberate movements of the trunk, checking things, getting all of the interesting smells and information of other elephants that may have frequented this waterhole. Hmm. 'Dismissive toss of that little bit of grass. 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 ' Deliberate investigatory behavior. and a moon ball. Well, you're asking if elephants in this part of Africa have big tusks because they're part of the same family. Um, I don't know if I'd use the word family, but I suppose you could use that. But yes, a lot of it will be due to genetics. Sometimes it just happens, but a lot of the time, size, tusk, and girth will be down to genetics being passed on from the parent animals. And of course, it's documented that there are far fewer big tuskers around these days. Big tuskers were hunted out, particularly in the 1800s. The ivory was greatly prized, and the trophy hunting aspect of it all. But a lot of those genetics now do not get passed on the way that they used to, and natural selection or unnatural selection means that those animals with shorter tusks are less likely to get poached. But yes, so there is something to do with that. The genetics of a particular area that have survived through different lineages, certainly. It's a very East African scene, isn't it? Beautiful green lush grass, flat topped acacia, and what would it be now? An umbrella thorn. I can't remember if that's a Fachilia or a Senegalia because it has both hooked and straight thorns. But one of those flat crowned acacias, big open skull, massive elephant bull. See some of those big spines and thorns we were talking about a little bit earlier on those trees there. Very effective toothpick if ever you would need one. But those ones are not particularly bad. They're actually quite weak. You can easily snap them on your fingers, and they almost bend. They're really there, say, as an evolutionary adaptation of the tree against browsing pressure. It's a mechanical defense that the trees have developed over time. That's pretty much undisputed, in my opinion, anyway. If you look at trees of almost the same species found in places like Australia, continents that used to be connected to Africa, they have lots and lots of acacias, and many of you will know Australia officially have the word acacia now, or genus acacia for their trees, and we had to change ours a few years ago. Ironic in that the word acacia means thorn, because none of the acacia trees in Australia, to my knowledge at least, have any thorns because there are no large browsing animals against which the trees have to defend themselves. And it's an evolutionary arms race, as with all forms of evolution. Trees develop thorns, animals develop ways to get around thorns, like the long eyelashes, the thicker skins. But there are many other ways that trees protect themselves, of course, as well. Chemical defenses, the releasing of extra tannins and poisons into their leaves to make them less palatable under browsing pressure. And another one I particularly like, where a tree can give off particular pheromones that will attract certain types of parasitic wasp, basically thinking that there's an influx of caterpillars upon which to lay their eggs. They will actually get there and potentially defend the tree. And a lot of these acacias have what are called extra floral nectaries, which are little glands that produce sugary water to feed ants, which have no benefit whatsoever to the tree. The nectar is nothing to do with any flowers. They are purely producing that to feed their home security system. And that attracts ants to the trees, and then the ants swarm onto the faces of any browsers that are there for too long and cause the browser to move off. There are even thorn trees of some description that have developed hollow thorns, used to be called the false umbrella thorn, one that springs to mind. And those hollow thorns are used as homes for little ants and things to live inside. So not only have they got their own security system, but they provide them accommodation as well. Well, there's a straw-tailed wider. Melinda, I'm honestly not sure how far and wide the elephants of El Doño can roam. Generally speaking, the bulls will roam further than the herds within their home ranges. I've never visited that area. I'm not quite sure what the available area is to them. So I'm not really qualified to answer that one, I'm afraid. See if any females come close to this male wider, see if he starts displaying for her. We've seen this, whether it's the exact same bird, but a bird on this bush before, and they withers have what's called an arena or a lek, a preferred perch or an area where they will display for their females and hopefully gain as many mating opportunities as possible. Well, I think we're almost out of time. I've just seen the clock. I haven't heard anything in my ear, so possibly my headphones have died, in which case I apologise. But I hope you've all enjoyed this afternoon. It has been great to spend time with you all. Some wonderful sightings as always. And don't forget to stay with us for the rest of the afternoon. Sunset Safari will be heading out shortly, and I'll be back again tomorrow at 12:30 Central African time.